everyone, I'm glad you're here today. I have with me Robert King. And Robert, welcome to the show. So glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
For sure. And I just want to just share with everybody, Robert is being such a trooper today because he's not feeling well, but he committed and he's like, I still want to stick it out and I still want to be here. And you've got two little ones at home. And I just really appreciate you putting your time today to have this conversation with me.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I hope people understand that my voice doesn't always sound like this deep and sexy. It's usually very high pitched and nerdy. So enjoy it, enjoy this treat.
Well, also, I think also as because we're going to talk about, obviously we're talking about Robert's book today. It's going to be a lot of what we talk about, but I also think like, so when you're picturing the person who's telling these stories, make sure you don't picture, this sexy, deep voiced person. You need to really get that the
Yeah,
nerdy voice you just talked about was what was also in the room, I guess.
yeah,
Right.
no, this is not how I normally sound. It's yeah,
Right.
it's a departure.
So Robert, your book, No One Here Is Like Me, came out on September 14th. So you start your book in chapter 1 in a preschool class with your 3-year-old.
Mhm.
And the question that the teacher asks, and I might not get this exactly word for right, so please correct me, but it is, who here identifies as Black? I don't think they even said identifies. Who here is Black or something? Is that basically how that?
Yeah, that was it. It was that, and then it morphed into raise your hand if you're Black, basically.
Uh, and what I just appreciated in the way that you tell the story, Robert, is you're carrying us on the journey of being in that room and in your own internal struggle to respond to this and how it triggered you and threw you off into really being thoughtful about yourself and then looking at your own child. And can you give just our readers a little bit more background of why this moment was both triggering for you and also, I guess, confusing, you might say, for your own child in that moment?
Sure. Yeah, it was triggering and confusing for me as well. Um, yeah, it's it took me back to, and I had no idea this was kind of in me. It was, and I think it's happening a lot now. New experiences that I'm seeing the world differently and new with my sons. Um, but it was triggering because it was like identifying the other in the room. And to be clear, I should preface it by saying the teacher is so sweet, super nice. She's done an amazing job. There was no malice, no bad intentions there. It was really, her intention was to like celebrate because it was Black History Month, and let's celebrate heritage and all that. But for whatever reason, to me it came off, and actually to another parent who was in the little story circle that we were in,
Yeah.
whatever it's called there, who happens to be biracial as well, Black and white. So we had obviously talked about it afterwards, and she felt the same thing, where it was like, yeah, I felt like it was picking out the other, like you're other, you're different, and it just didn't come off to us, um in a good way. Um,
Mm.
Maybe to our kids, it's different now. The world is changing. Perhaps I hope so. Maybe it's like, yeah, it's a benign thing. Like, yep, it's me. I'm this. I'm that. It's fine. Whatever. But it felt really weird, and I was like, don't single us out. you know.
Well,
Um,
yeah. And also, I can imagine like a 3-year-old's reaction to that question is different than maybe an adult's way that they hear that question. But the otherness that
sure.
I only
And
have my,
and it's. I'm sorry to cut you off. It's
no.
uniquely different for my son because so I'm biracial, I'm Black and white, and you can tell, you can see I am brown. My skin is brown. um there's no hiding that. My wife is white, and so our kids look like white kids. They don't
Mm.
look like they're mixed race at all. He's got like dirty blonde hair and green eyes. Gorgeous kid. I mean, gorgeous. We hit the jackpot. um, um, but it's, if you look at the features, you can tell he's my son. We both have curly hair and like next to each other, face to face, you can tell. But other than that, like he's just this white kid walking around. And so when that question came up, and I was kind of like looking at him like, oh right, we haven't talked about this at all. He just knows
Mm.
like daddy looks like this and mom looks like this, but he doesn't really know who he is a little bit, and that's still something that he will have many years of defining for himself. So there was a lot going on at that
Yeah.
nursery school story time.
Yeah. And in the way this chapter unfolds, even you take us back to a story of something that happened in your high school that like my jaw dropped when I was reading this part of the book. And I wonder if I can ask you to read from that section of the book, because before we even go there, though, I want to just check in, because in that moment, you're hearing the question with your ears and for your son's ears, is what I'm hearing you say. Is like, how is he going to respond? And his response to that was, the way you write it in the book is actually kind of humorous, but it must have not felt humorous in that moment. Can you just take our listeners there for a moment?
Yeah, to that moment, like for
That
my
moment
son.
with your son, yeah.
Yeah, and this is maybe just my cross to bear kind of thing, but like uh, I'm always kind of watching things, being like having a comedy background. I'm always kind of watching things like I'm here, but I'm also like kind of popped out, like a bird's eye view of it. Like, what's really going on in this scene? Like I know I'm in it as an actor, but I'm also like up, producing and directing the scene a little bit, like looking at it,
Right.
watching the dailies or whatever, um,
What's the
and
audience seeing in this moment? Right.
they're seeing. He's 3 years old. Like what he knows is what's right in front of him, and what's right in front of him at that moment was like his shoes, his shoelaces, and Siri. I'm talking, and Siri wants to pop in. Siri, no, go away. Um, Sorry. He's just like picking at the ground, and at that he's 4 now, and he's become a little bit better at focusing. But at that time, he was just like, "All right, the authority figures in the room told me I have to like sit in a circle, so I'll do that." But like, I'm checked out. And even me just being like, "Hey, buddy, like, do you know what's going on? What we're talking about?" And he's just like, "Dad, no, unless you have a toy for me to play with, or we're gonna run around and get dirty, spread germs all over ourselves. I'm not interested. I'm out."
Yeah.
So it was for me. I saw that happening, and I was like recognizing, okay, that's where you are in your development. But also, I was like, check. Don't forget, Rob. We're gonna have to talk about this at some point with him. Like the
Hmm.
race talk will have to come up at some point. So it was like a little reminder for myself. And then it was like, oh, and also talk to your therapist because you're dealing with a lot right now.
Yes.
So
And what and like just plot wise, if I'm going back to it, he didn't raise his hand. He did not see himself in that moment as identifying as the teacher described. And so I'm sure that like was a wake up. And I don't know if a wake up call is maybe the strongest word, but it was like, oh shoot, I gotta have this conversation. Well, I'm curious about what that felt like inside. It was like, was it with regret, or what was the emotion going inside of you? And you're like, oh gosh, I have to have this conversation. Were you dreading? Like, what came up for you?
um dread is a lot, but it's close. I mean, you realize as a parent, you're like, oh, there's a lot of things that I have to do. I'm responsible for a human being. Yeah, and I kind of like nudged him, and I was like, hey, buddy, you can raise your hand. Like you're black. He kind of just looked at me, just like, what are you talking about? Like he was 3 at that point. He knew his colors. He knew what black looks like. Like literally black in the Crayola crayon thing. It's dark. It's very dark. And so he was taking things very literal. And he's like, that doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about?
Mm, mm.
And just kind of blew me off. Like, Dad's making no sense. I'm out again. Um, so that was a thing, and it was like a reminder for me, like maybe he won't identify as black. It was
Mm.
very revealing of um, the journey to come. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
for myself and my kids. So
yeah. And so, so I would love to have you go to that section of the book that I talked about in chapter one, because the story about your high school clearly informed some of what your reaction is into this otherness, obviously. And like, this is such a, I mean, like I said, my jaw dropped. Do you mind reading from that section for our listeners?
for sure, and I'll set it up by saying like, and I truly want to come into every situation expecting the best of people, assuming the best and giving them the benefit of the doubt. And what happens, I think, a lot, and it's a similar situation with like commercials and businesses, and it's representation and not having people enough voices, the diverse voices in the room to be like, hey, this is something you're not thinking about because you don't have this background or whatever. And so yeah, in my high school we had this thing, and I'll get into it. And I think it just came about, and it was so shocking, I think, thinking about now because you're like, how did no one see that this is a bad idea or the optics aren't great here?
Yeah. And we
So
want to I
I'll
want to set
just
the stage like this is in the 2000s, right? We'll just set that
yeah,
stage a little bit, right? Yeah. Okay.
exactly. Yeah, this is
Right.
not 1960. I know by my deep voice, you're like, "Ooh, how old is this gentleman?" Not that old. Okay, so here's this brief um, paragraph. In high school, they did this thing known as the senior auction. It no longer exists because it was essentially a slave auction. Some of the seniors were auctioned off to raise money for, I don't know, the Sadie Hawkins dance or prom or free opioids in the lunchroom, something like that. The host brought us out onto the stage one by one in front of an auditorium full of rowdy students and parents, selling us off to the highest bidder. In a way, maybe it was a good thing, like an instant immersion course teaching white kids what slavery felt like. Something tells me the real slave trading blocks had less laughter and high fives, though. The rules were very clear. Whoever buys you owns you the next day. Let me just stop for a second and point out, like Brian was saying, this wasn't the 1970s or 80s. I'm not that old. It was 2000. It was the dawn of a new millennium, and we were allowed to own other people in school. For all you calendrical nerds out there, I'm aware that the year 2000 was actually not the beginning of a new millennium, but the end of the former one. The way I worded it, though, was had more impact. So shut up. So the day after the auction, teachers would allow kids who were bought, let's just call them slaves, to completely disregard their class schedule and instead be at the beck and call of the students who bought them. A few of my classmates ended up chipping in to buy me. I was very expensive, by the way, young and strong, the ideal slave. As soon as the transaction was complete, I was whisked away to someone's house so they could groom me. First, they dyed my hair blonde. I think the official color was Aryan cream. I don't know. Then they dressed me in turquoise spandex, a leopard print bandana, and a white shirt with a custom message emblazoned across the front in big letters. It said, "Am I black or white?" There was a message I received from preschool all the way through my slave trade days in high school. The message was that I was different. I was other, something to play with and laugh at. I don't know if you want me to keep going, but
That's
that's kind of
I think yeah, that really hit the mark. So I'm just I first of all, thanks for sharing that. I know that
yeah,
you
no
said in the
problem.
book they no longer do this because someone figured out this was not a good idea. But the what I wanted to take back is like you come to this with a great sense of like I would say grace and humor when you're talking about it, even the way you write about it. But I'm curious on the day that it happened, on the day you were wearing the shirt and your hair's dyed blonde, were you like feeling clownish or were you actually feeling certainly other? Like that experience seems you can see this as harrowing, and yet the way that you tell the story feels like I was game. And so I'm just curious what that if what where that lands for you.
Yeah, I honestly, I mean, I think I was game at that time. I think I was like, I'm just happy to be included in things, um, and I also I grew up with two white parents, which you'll find when you read the book,
Yep.
um,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't really know my black side until I was in my 30s. I didn't meet them until I was in my 30s. So, I didn't really have that different perspective in the room to be like, "Hey, this might come off weird." I didn't have
Mm,
that father to nudge me in the side and be like, "Hey, buddy, raise your hand and point out that you're uncomfortable," or that you're this or that. Um, so I was just like, "Cool, let's do it." And I'm getting laughs. Also, I was like, just starting to develop my comedic voice. So I was like, this is getting laughs. It reminds me of like something like Dave Chappelle said, and I get Chappelle controversial, sure, for many reasons,
yes.
But when it came to comedy, like he why he left Chappelle's show, and he basically was like, yeah, I was getting laughs, people loved it, but there was one moment when he was in a room and he looked around and was all white executives, and he was like, I'm getting the wrong kind of laughs. They're not
Mm,
laughing with me at the point I'm trying to make. They're laughing at me, and that's when he was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make that humor for for that purpose or with that outcome. And looking back now, I'm able to be like, oh yeah, those were the wrong laughs.
mm,
But at the time I was just like, cool, we're all doing this, I'll dye my hair for you, no problem. Whatever.
yeah. I think
uh,
that in this chapter you go on to make this really this beautiful point where you say, like, I'm not landing the plane here. Like, I'm not gonna wrap this up in a bow. And I definitely walked in as a reader, like, oh, and he's gonna tell me the moral of the story here. And I should have known from the beginning, like, that's not how this is gonna wrap up, because that's not how these things wrap up. But it was so clear that you were like, that's, can you speak into a little bit like how that choice was made for you as a writer, and I guess as an
Yeah, I
individual?
struggled with that. I struggled with that a lot because, I would have loved to been able to been like, and here's everything I learned. Here's the lesson for all you readers, and here's how you do it. Go out and live wonderful, harmonious lives. And racism is gone now. Obama couldn't do it, but I took care of it with this ebook. That was definitely the goal. No, I realized as I was writing it, and as a writer, I'm a brainstormer first and an outliner first, and I was like, here's certain feelings, but I'm still struggling with them. I'm still working through them. And also these are just mine. It would be crazy for me to be like, here's how you should feel about these complex issues.
Mm.
That's insane. I don't have that right. So I just wanted to like, hey, you know what? If this gets anyone thinking about their own situations, and maybe starts up some feelings for them that they have been hesitating to deal with or not sure how to deal with, like that's my goal. But I can't tell you the outcome. I can't lead you anywhere. I can just kind of like shine a light on some things that I felt. Maybe you can relate to them in certain ways, but that's it.
I was very left with, I'm still thinking for sure, and I would just check in, because you said, like, this is where some of my comedy, like, I maybe got some of my legs here as a comedian. I started to learn a little bit what makes people laugh versus laughing in the right way. So I'm curious about how this comes up even in your work now when you're writing for the Chase. Like, do you find yourself like does this impact you at all as the writer that you are now in terms of the comedy?
Yeah, I feel more responsibility actually. Uh, it's still in many rooms, writing like staff writing and comedy writing. uh there there's still not there's not a lot of equality. Like there's still a lack of diversity in many writers rooms. And so you know I'm I try to go in and be conscious of that, whether it's like the Chase, I'm writing trivia questions, and there's a comedic element to it, whatever. I still try to work in as many Black history trivia questions as I possibly can. There's little things, when I'm pitching jokes, or when I'm writing certain characters, I do feel a responsibility to lead with my personal voice, as I think most writers do, but mine is a different voice than you know unfortunately maybe a majority of uh the typical writers' rooms.
Yeah, and then the room you're describing specifically, of course, right? And like a typical, I would say, is we hear that again and again here on this podcast, even as like the representation isn't there yet. So I'm sometimes the sole person carrying this weight or privilege, depending on the moment and how you see it. Obviously, I think is what I think. I've heard both sides of that coin be spoke about. Um,
Yeah.
and I think about when you're saying this, one of the things that really lands with me is at the same time you're I'm just focusing on chapter one a lot because it really impacted me. We're gonna to other ones just so you know, so don't worry. But at the end of this chapter, you're thinking about, how do I talk to my son, and how do I talk to myself was the other question that I learned. Like, oh, I'm still learning how to talk to myself about that. Does that resonate with kind of how that landed for you?
Yeah, yeah. I'm very much a work in progress, and I think we all are. And there's certain things that I learn about myself, um, and with every new experience, and especially like going back to this, my kids, if you could see them, I mean, besides their pigment, they are mini me's. They look so much like me, and so when I look at them, I'm learning so much, about myself as I watch them, make these new explorations, and figure out things for themselves. Um, and it reminds me of when I was young, and I'm like, oh, okay, and that takes me back to, just like in chapter one, it takes me back to what I experienced, and then I kind of relive that, and I'm able to like review it a little bit, and like, oh, am I good? Is it, can I put that to
Mm.
bed, or do I still have unresolved feelings about certain things? And most times they're unresolved feelings. So it's,
Yeah.
all right, let's check that, and we'll go back and talk about it in therapy. you
Yeah.
know.
Right, and that's a beautiful way for you to even said that because you start this book by with a lot of praise for a therapist that you first went to as a young person, and I think a lot of listeners here can relate to going to therapy and being like, "Am I bad because I'm going? Is something wrong with me because I'm going to therapy?" And like that's a lot of people's first reaction to like, "Why do I need to go to therapy? Is there something wrong with me?" And how you had a beautiful
Yeah.
journey through that experience of like learning to talk to yourself or recognize yourself differently. I know you said it's a work in progress, but is there anything you want to share about that before I move on? I don't want to write right over that.
No, I mean, I'll just give a shout out to therapy. It's great. It's and there are many forms of therapy. There's like a formal one with a therapist, but also when you're talking to your friends and you're just venting, that's therapy. It's therapeutic. It's good. And I'm saying this basically to myself. I'm only looking at myself in the video. I can see myself here. And like, Rob, go to therapy more. Take care of yourself more. Don't hold things in. It's not healthy. You always feel better. Like even if like you go in, and I've heard friends who just recently started going to therapy, and they go in, they're just like, I don't know what I'm gonna talk about. And you sit down and then you're just like, so this happened and this and you're and you're like, okay, so maybe I had some unresolved issues or things that I needed to talk about. And you don't know until you start. So
Yeah.
start.
I had therapy last week and I remember my therapist saying, "Do you just want to tell me, do you want to just give me a download real quick or do you want me to stop you?" Because I was like, "This happened and this happened and this." She goes, I go, "Just let me download first and then we'll figure out which ones we want to look at." She goes, "Okay, great. I'll help you figure it out." So it was great.
Yeah.
Um, so, you had the show, I guess, quite a few years ago called African American, which seems like
Yeah.
maybe when this kind of conversation with yourself started. Is that kind of right? When this, like, I would say not, the conversation started much younger, but the public conversation started with
Yes.
you sharing this journey. And then now we have this book, No One Here Is Like Me. How do you connect the dots here um, and where do you see this I don't want to say see where it's going, but where is this coming from other than because you're getting you work as a writer, like you have this is like something else that's driving you. What's that drive about for you?
It's really all about fame and money. That's it.
Great,
That's
you're in
it.
the right place. You're in the right place.
Nothing
That's what we
else
want here, right,
matters.
guys? Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Bye.
Bye. Good podcast episode.
uh, no, the, I, I, I don't know where it's going, which is it's exciting and terrifying.
Yeah.
Um, but I did that solo show in 2010, and I started that. That was like really around the first time I started writing things down, and go like I started as an actor, and I had a buddy. We were bartending together, and we were talking, and it was like a really cool thing. And I've gone back like maybe 2 years ago, and I thanked him for this. I didn't really talk to him for like 20 years, but I went back and thanked him because I was like, he gave me this advice. He was like, "Hey, have you thought about writing? Because the way you talk, you tell stories."
Mm.
And he's probably telling me like, "Shut up, you talk too much," whatever. But it was,
Thanks for that
like I
advice.
never,
Got it.
yeah, yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. The nugget that I pulled out was like, "You should write," and I never thought about it until that point, and I that led me into like, okay, I started like studying writing and went to some schools and then just like started tinkering with it and seeing where my voice would take me. And the first thing I started was like, oh, I have a lot of stories from growing up that I might want to explore. So I started just putting a journal together, and that led to the solo show that I did in like 2010 for about a year and a half, and that connects to the book because yes, it was like a very similar themes about racism and growing up being biracial and figuring out your identity and all that stuff. But I was still so young as a writer that a lot of it is very surface level. I
Mm.
go back and read it and like you know like what I try to do with a lot of the stories in this book and even back then, it's like you try to like a roller coaster. You're going up, you're setting things up, and then you go down a little bit, beneath the surface, a little bit to let people feel some things, and then you go back up with a joke and relieve the tension a little bit. But with that roller coaster, it was kind of shallow. I didn't go that
Mm.
far beneath the surface, probably because I didn't know how. I was scared. I was still figuring stuff out for myself. um, but then when the opportunity to write this book came along, I was able to look at those stories and, with a little bit more time and be like, oh, there was some deeper feelings that and deeper themes that I really didn't explore. So I was really able to go deeper I think, and get more personal and more real and raw. I'll just keep throwing out adjectives, you know. And so, and so I hope that this book was, the proper progression, I guess, of those
Yeah.
stories and my writing.
Yeah, so
Hopefully,
it goes a little. So what I'm hearing you say is it goes a little bit further. Even one of the questions I was going to ask you today is like, if you were to remount African American, would you make some revisions or edits to it? I'm hearing you say, yeah, because I'm a different writer person these days, or something. Is that right?
yeah. Actually, I was thinking about a solo show for recently, and you know, there's still a lot that I haven't mined, I think, in my personal story. So like, uh, I met my biological father when I was 30, and it came about because of doing African American. Like I talked about not knowing my black father in the show, and I kind of just like, it was like thrown out there, like, so whatever, blah blah blah. And then after doing the show for about a year, I was like, I think there's something missing here. Like, I think I should meet him. It
Mm.
got me thinking about it, for performing it for so long, and so that led to me getting in touch with him and meeting him. And after
Wow.
meeting him and getting to know my biological grandfather, and a few years later, then I found out that I had two sisters as well, two
Wow.
other sisters, and I've developed a relationship with them, and they're fantastic, and we're close, and we're growing this awesome relationship, which is really really cool. But that's something that's still growing, and so I might want to talk about that, like what family means, um, and that journey. Who knows?
Yeah.
Or I might never
Well,
talk about it. Whatever.
right, but two things that I want to point out, Robert, and for our audience especially, is how the artistic journey brought you to that almost decision to reach out or getting this public with it. And I think a lot of times the conversations we have here on this podcast are around how much impact you have by putting yourself out there, and that's just not like just to gratuitously put yourself out there, but like the putting your artwork out there and being creatively out there, how it impacts the people around you and the people beyond that circle, and then how it just reflexively comes back and it motivated you to say, I think maybe it's time for me to reach out to my dad. And then you said this family that's forming that you didn't know you had, and the connection that is coming from that, and how so I think that it's easy for an artist to discredit what they put into motion when they create something, unless it makes a lot of money or wins an award. And so I just
Yeah.
want to advocate for how cool that is. That look at the abundance that has come from this. That might not be the abundance that we're always running towards.
Wow, I really appreciate you pointing that out. I mean, I know I made the connection up here. To listeners, I'm like above my head. Like, I made the I can mentally make the connection, from writing those stories down, doing the show, and meeting my biological father. But like, emotionally, and I really never pieced it all together. Like, that was a thread that led to getting to know my sisters and my nieces. Because I decided to like write some stories down and be vulnerable. So yeah, I never really emotionally made that connection. So I appreciate
Oh,
you
I'm
doing it
so
for
glad that
me.
some good came out the day
Yeah.
when you're not feeling well. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And that's a fervent belief that we talk about a lot here on this podcast. So I appreciate you saying that. So I want to go so I want to talk about this chapter 2. I'm not going through all the chapters, y'all. I promise you. I just picked out ones that I'm like really that like really resonated with me. So, but in chapter 2, it's not me, it's you. You talk about false questions, and
Hmm.
and I want you, can you define that for the audience, because I think this is a trap that a lot of people find themselves in, but you articulated so beautifully from your perspective and in the systems around us. So I would love for you to just kind of explain to our audience, uh, first of all, how you learned about these, and that, because I think that's an adorable story about your wife, and then also like where you see it and what the impact is of those.
It's the chapter is really about, false premises, right? Not accepting false premises, rejecting false premises. And the idea came about. I learned it, I guess, from my wife, who is a lawyer, and she is a professional arguer, and it's
Fun at home, how to have fun
oh,
at home.
oh, yeah, yeah. It's like, I I know I never win an argument, for many reasons. One of them being that she's a professional. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to win. But what I've come to like understand, just real quick side note about our relationship, is like, I know when I should have won, and she knows when I should have won. So that's my victory, when like I can look in her eyes, and she sees that I know, like, I should have won that argument. I didn't because I'm not as good as you, but like I'm right here, so I'm
All
going to
right.
bed. Um, but it's this idea. I assume it comes from you know arguing in court or law or whatever, but it's rejecting false premises, right? So um, it it's like if someone asks you a question, it could be a loaded question, right? Um, you know, uh, I'm blanking now because my
Well, you
brain
could,
is
I mean,
a
you tell a
fog of.
beautiful story about you, your friend Tom at the lunch table when you're at the lunch table when you're very young. I mean, you could use that story if you wanted to. I love that story in the book.
Yeah, sure, yeah, sure. So I mean, the idea is basically like about false premises, like you know, if someone gives you a leading question, they give you, they ask you a question that it may not. If you just accept the premise that they've laid out for you, you might be arguing or answering the question from a disadvantage, right? Or from a place like my brain is just such a fog right now. God, this is why I wrote it down and didn't want to answer.
Do you want to read from the
I'm
book
gonna
right here?
I'm gonna look it up and read
I
from the
love
book
it. I
because
love when you read from
I
the book.
think because I had an editor and they were like, "Hey, here's the best way to lay out."
Perfect.
Um, so among the many things my wife has taught me over the years, one is always at the front of my mind: not accepting the premise of a question. Some people ask questions to learn more, and they're truly seeking answers. Certain questions, though, are filled with opinions or assumptions or inaccurate narratives. By responding directly to a question with a false premise, you're automatically arguing from an unwinnable position, which is what I do all the time, right, with my wife. Um, and, the point you brought up about the story you brought up about my friend Tom when we were in like first grade in this lunchroom, and he was like my best friend. We were I don't know 7 or whatever, but at that time like he's my best friend. No one else matters. It's just me and Tom.
Right.
And you know he he told me one day, and this story's in the book, so I'll kind of just paraphrase a little bit. But he was like, "Hey, my mom doesn't want me to hang out with you anymore because you're black." Um, or no, he said because she says you're bad, and I was like, well, what what did I do? Like yeah, that could be right. Like I'm 7-year-old, I get into trouble. Like I like to break the rules a little bit. Um, but then he was like, I think she thinks you're bad because you're black, and that like if it was just bad, I think even then I understood. I was like, yeah, okay, I could see that. Like I get in trouble a lot, whatever with my mom, in trouble like a 7-year-old gets in trouble. Like, don't
Right.
do that, don't spill that, don't whatever. But when he was like, You're you're she thinks you're bad because you're black, I was like, I've never seen that connection made. I don't understand that. And because it was coming from an adult, I was like, there must be some credibility to it. And that is kind of the idea of like the false premise. Like she I have trouble calling people racist, but that's racism. She was racist in that moment. Making laying out that premise that like that because I'm black I'm bad. And for me at 7 to accept that, like, that it took a long time for me to realize, many years for me to realize like that wasn't my issue, that was on her. I don't need to
Mm,
accept that. Like I spent a lot of years like trying to argue that and make a case for myself, like that I'm not bad just because I look like this or whatever. But it's like that was a false premise. I should have just been like,
yeah.
well, that's dumb. Your mom's wrong. Screw her,
Yeah, there's
But
no
I was
argument
7,
here is what I'm
so
hearing you say. Like this question isn't real. If I by engaging in this
I don't
question, I
accept.
am
Yes,
saying yeah, I'm saying yes to something that's some belief here. And I just
yes,
yeah, that
it,
and I can see yeah how that would, like you say in the book, it drove me to be like prove that I'm like the best kid. I'm like always good. I'm never bad. And it's like the premise is a setup.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I just realized it also comes up a lot in politics, and you'll see that a lot in debates, where politicians, and I think it's actually like an episode of The West Wing when they're doing like a debate prep or something like that, and someone probably Allison Janney's character or whatever is just like, no, stop, don't answer that question. answer a different question that you want to answer, because that question is a trap. They're setting you
Mm,
up to answer something that setting you up to talk from an unwinnable position. Basically,
mm.
don't accept that
Wow.
premise that they're providing. Provide your own premise that from something that you believe in. Now, I don't want to tie myself in with politics because there's a lot, a lot of other bad actors there. But that's a something that I think people need to realize when they're dealing with like other people. Like, it's not everyone has. They're not always coming to you with a legit premise in their question or their argument. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, and now I think I'll win any arguments in my household tonight. So I just want to thank you for that as well, Robert, in case my
you know
fiance and
what?
I get in an
That's
argument.
all I
So
need. That's all I wanted.
thank you. That's all I wanted to.
You're so welcome. At least one of us should win an argument. It's not gonna be me.
So you have this beautiful moment in chapter 4 where you basically make amends and forgive your grandmother,
Hmm.
and you wrote it very much like a TV script. The rest of the book is very much essay memoir. What made you move into this different use of genre inside of your book? Why did you decide to change the storytelling in that moment?
I it's such a weird thing. I've been struggling with how to get some kind of closure with this moment, with my
And
grandmother, and
please, if I think it's helpful if you give a little backstory even to our
yeah.
listeners here. Yeah.
So I mentioned that I didn't meet my biological father until I was 30. Um, you know, my and I found out later on that my grandmother was very much against my biological parents, my mom and my dad, being together. It was the,
Mm,
the early '80s, and you know, she just didn't. She was like, we don't do that. You're not. I don't want you dating a black guy, um, and so when my mom got pregnant, for a number of reasons, like racism being one of them, and the pressure from family, they did not stay together, and he was out of the picture. And I said in the book, like, my grandmother was, once I was born, she was nothing but love towards me. She raised me quite a bit. I was with her a lot, and I never would have never known any of those stories unless my mother had finally told me, many years later, when I was a grown up. And so towards the end of my grandmother's life, I never really talked to her about that. I never had closure with her, and I started to build resentment because I was like, wow, I didn't know one side of myself for all my life, because of you a little bit, not, maybe not
mm,
all of you, but a lot of you. And so I had a lot of resentment for my grandmother, and she was older, so I wasn't able to talk to her about it, and I never had closure. And then finally at her funeral, I really I didn't know what to do, and I still wasn't able to like really say goodbye to her. And so I struggled with how to do that for a long time, and finally I was like, well, write something, write it down. Like, what would you
mm.
have done? What would you want to say? And it was really it's kind of, funny. Again, one of those moments where I'm like, I'm in it as a person, but I'm also like popped out bird's eye view looking at myself as it's happening. And my wife and I, before our second child was born, last year, we went on a little like baby moon. We went to Paris. It was really nice, and I wrote this short film about like how I would have liked to address this closure with my grandmother. And I wrote
While
all
you
of
were
it
in Paris, you
except
wrote
for,
this movie?
I wrote it before we
Oh,
got
okay.
before we
Got
went on the trip. But
got
I stopped at the monologue, that's in the book. The monologue that's in the
mhm,
book, I stopped
yeah.
before I wrote that, and I was like, all right, I have a whatever 8 hour flight. Like, I'll write it on the plane. And it's nighttime. Everyone's asleep. I have my one little light on, and I'm like, I'm gonna do it. Like, I'm isolated. This is my time to write it. And I'm just tears are just streaming down my face on this plane in the middle of the night as I'm like writing this monologue to my grandmother, the words that I would have said to her, if we had ever gotten the chance to talk while she was alive. And and like, it's very real, and I'm very cathartic, and I'm feeling all these emotions as I'm writing it. But I'm also like taking a moment to pop out and like see myself on this plane while all these people are snoring and sleeping, and my wife's next to me just laid out drooling, and I'm just like, this is what a ridiculous moment, like, it was very funny to me, as a bystander, but while I was in it, it was very emotional. So yeah, I just it fit with the story I was telling about the backstory of my family. And so I figured the best way to do it was just put the exact words I wanted to say into the book. And that was
Yeah.
kind of my closure, and I feel really good about it.
And I will just
Yeah.
say that is a really beautifully precious part of the book where I think we see another side of you in a different way because it's the book is told in the first person. And so we suddenly see you truly communicating with someone else. And I think there's a different angle we get when we get to see you talking to someone besides us, right? Besides the reader there. And it just hits different. It really hits different. It's kind of it's pretty amazing. So to talk a little bit more, because you got into a little bit just now, and you gave us a little bit of a writing lesson in the middle of this episode today. But I want to check in.
Huh.
What is the writing process like for you for something like this? You said brainstorm some ideas and what was that like for you? Was it like I know what was it? You said you had an editor. Can you just really break down what it was like to put this beautiful book together?
Sure. Yeah. My editor, Joanne Varicose at Scribd was so, I mean, invaluable. I had never written a book before, and while I had written a number of things, different shows and scripts, this was something totally different. And so I had written some stories. It's actually the first chapter was something that a sample that I had shared with them at Scribd and was like, hey, what do you think about this? Because we had talked about maybe doing something, and they liked the theme, and they were like, all right, let's pull out some more. Like, what do you want to say? And so I kind of wrote down some themes. It was not a typical book proposal, but it was kind of like a treatment, for other writers out there, like maybe a treatment for a series or whatever. And it was like, here's the themes that I want to talk about. Um, and here's how I might approach them. And she helped me kind of form that, like, okay, you have these stories that deal with, race and family and fatherhood. And then it was like, you know, maybe it's the parallels that you've experienced from yourself growing up, your stories, and what your sons are experiencing, and then like what you learn from your own experience and how you help guide your sons, on their journey. So she really helped me figure out the approach to and mold how I was going to tell those stories and put them together. And then it was basically once I knew the overall, like, okay, this is the overall theme, the overarching theme. Then it was, what are some stories that I might want to tell? Let's get some of those experiences out there and dig into them a little bit, and then like put them aside, and then like where are my kids at right now, what are they going through, and just kind of trying to pair together experiences that I've gone through and what I'm learning while watching my kids, and
Mm,
seeing how they match up a little bit, and then really like just putting them down on paper, um, just trying to like have a top line idea and then sit down in a free space, whether it be on a plane, in the middle of the night, or after my kids go to bed, and just sitting outside and thinking about it, and then just kind of free forming my thoughts, and then like using really helping letting my editor help me, whittle them down to something worth reading.
got it. So when you talk about this, so I want to really get into the process even just a little bit more if we can, which is, are you someone
Sure.
are you staring at the screen? You're like, are you in flow? Are you cobbling together different paragraphs from different places? What is that actual experience, that moment like for you?
um I'm mostly just flow with it. I know that I kind of know where I want to start and where I want to go,
Got
and
it.
where I want to end, basically. I'm not the type of usually I'm not the type of writer that, I have an idea and I'll just like just go and just like put words onto paper a little bit. I need to know where it's headed, um, and that doesn't always get there. I
Mm,
once I know like my where I'm starting from and where I'm trying to go to, then I feel safe enough to like just go and put some things together. And sometimes I'll realize halfway through, like, oh, we're going somewhere else, and that's fine. Then I'll just like pop out again, look at it, think about that, and then like readjust where my endpoint is, um, and then keep going. But I like to know. It's like when I write like, or I'm like teaching like sketch writing or something like that, like know what your premise is. Again, premises.
mm,
Like know what your premise for the piece is, so that you have, something to guide you. Otherwise, like it can just be wishy-washy, and it comes in and out and it's not as focused. But like when you know where you're trying to get to, I think it's a little bit more focused, and you can tell. at least I can, when like the writer knew where they were going.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and when they
Better
when
to
they
read.
don't,
I
it
mean,
just
yeah.
yeah.
Hard to follow.
So
Yeah, Robert, I'll just say I'm really drilling down on this because I'm in the middle of writing a book myself. And so like it has taken, 3 months to write the annotated table of contents so that I can say, where am I going in this book
mhm.
so that I can make the points I want to make. So I just appreciate you really sharing that with me because it's vulnerable and like there's a point that I want to make and I also want to share the story. So I just appreciate you kind of letting me in on your process a little bit because it kind of reaffirms like I am not the person who is tending to think about let me make my point. I tend to be like let me just start writing and that's not actually super helpful to me. And the person I'm working with has really helped me realize oh no actually it's much better when you have a little plan in front of you. And so I'm even curious in working with an editor, you're a writer who's accomplished writer, was there anything that she really taught you that you're like, oh, or she was always like, you're doing it again? Like, did you ever have anything that came out of that you noticed?
Yeah, she was so sweet and so supportive. But there's certain crutches, and this just certain crutches that I use, and I think a lot of writers do, and not people do when they're talking. I use but a lot. I use just, the word
Mm,
just, a lot, and instead of just being clear with a thought, sometimes I'll just let it run on a little bit or over explain it. And there were certain things um, that I think, I'm 40. I've been writing for a while. I'm at a different confidence level than I was. If I had been writing this with an editor at 25, I maybe not wouldn't have pushed back and didn't wouldn't have known my voice as much. But like there's certain things, choices that I made where she's like, I don't know about this, and I'm like, no, I feel good about that. Like
that's it.
that
Yeah.
that that was a choice, comedically or whatever, but it's that conversation, and we had a great trust together. So I'm glad you're working with someone. It's like as an actor, having a good director that you trust, um, that can keep that bird's eye view and keep, while when you are digging down deep into drilling down into one certain thing, they can also keep an eye on the full project, and the full story that's being told. But I just want to say this: if you are, someone that just like, you need to sit down at a blank page and just vomit words onto a page, that's okay.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
that. It's better to get something out than nothing.
Yeah.
But it definitely, then you want to make sure you have a process in place to go back and get it focused.
Right. And I'll say, it's kind of like I've been dancing back and forth with this. And now I'm a little bit, now I get to be a little more free zone. So I appreciate you reaffirming the people that can help with a lot more. So I don't want to keep you too much
Yeah.
longer, especially because you've been such a trooper here while you're not feeling well. But I got a couple more questions real quick. One is, what has writing this book taught you? What's your big takeaway here?
Um, I I'm still figuring that out. It's still brand new to the world. But, my wife kept checking in with me, once it went live, or it was, like,
Mm,
starting with like the night before, I guess it went live, and she was just like, because there are some very personal stories, and I think my family, you know, things that they didn't know about me, my extended family, and how I viewed things and how I felt about things, and I think they're still processing it a lot. And she was just like, "Are you okay with people, hearing these and reading these stories?" And I had such clarity. I was like, yeah, I'm good. Like it
wow.
felt so freeing and so good to just tell my story, my truth, and like put it out there, and not worry. Like, look, if someone's upset by something I said or offended, like that's never what I want. But it's probably that's you that like this is like it's a little harsh, but like that's a you problem. It's not a me problem.
Well, also, Robert, I was supposed to
If
say, like,
you're
your book is not, I want to make everyone hear, like, this, your book is not an unkind, or does it feel salacious, or like I'm reading a tabloid about your family either. So I think it clearly comes from your perspective here. I don't want to write over what you're saying, but I also want to make sure that like this, I want everyone, this isn't like a Robert's tell-all book about his family. Like that's
right,
not
yeah.
also the right. That's not the tone. I think the gift of your tone lets us. I mean, I'm not one of the people mentioned in the book. Obviously, so my response would be different, but I want to just reflect back to you that the tone with which you tell this book is so kind and caretaking and like I am one person in the world perspective that I think that you'd be hard pressed to be like he's a jerk for saying that. Like you'd be hard pressed to say he's putting people down. I just wanted to just share that with you as a unattached reader, at least. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, I tried to be as fair and unbiased as you can be when you're telling, your own perspective. But yeah, that I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. If you haven't already, I just want to just offer to you, if you've heard of the book Here for It, or How to Save Your Soul in America by R. Eric Thomas. It's a New York Times bestseller, and he's a playwright, and I feel like your tone and his tone. I just started his book like this morning, literally this morning. I started reading his book,
Okay.
I was just so struck with how the honesty you both bring into your memoirs is super interesting, and I feel like there is a friend who is sitting next to me telling a story. So if that's not enough of a commercial to go download and start reading this book right now for anybody, or listening to this book right now, I don't know what else could be, but I felt I felt lucky to be able to read this book because I felt very with you. I was getting an inside glimpse as to one person's perspective and experience. And I thought that was, you don't always have that experience with a memoir. And I just wanted to compliment you on that great gift of the way that you brought the story to life, or brought, not story. I mean, it's a story that's your true story, but brought the story to the page. I might be a better way to say that. So thank you.
Wow, that's really I really appreciate that. Hopefully we can get that clip of you saying that, and I'll put that on my website or on Scribd.
Okay,
That's
one.
really
I have to ask you a
that's very
wild
sweet. Thank
question.
you.
I mean, it's my
Yeah,
honest truth. One
please.
wild question. Tell everybody just a little bit about your interviewing of Obama, because I think people are just going to be so excited to hear that little bit of story. Will you share that with everybody?
Yeah, yeah. In
Like how it came to be and
2020,
like what he taught you. Yeah.
it is very cool. I mean, so I used to write for a few companies owned by the same company, the Dad, excuse me, and Fatherly.com, and Barack Obama had his book coming out, Promised Land, and so he was on press tour, and a lot of it has to do with his background, his father, and being a father to two girls and all this stuff, and so we had this awesome interview panel set up with a few fathers and Barack Obama, and so we got to ask him a few questions, and it was really great. It was over Zoom, which like stinks because you're not in the room. Like I wanted to get in. I wanted to smell Obama. Like I wanted to. What does it smell like? Is it cocoa butter? Like what is it? I want to know. That's an experience. So I didn't get to smell him. I imagine it's cocoa butter. Like he looks shiny in a good way. Um, he
I
does.
love it.
Yeah. Um, but so we he talked with him for I don't know a half hour, 45 minutes, and he's a professional. Like so,
Hmm.
he let his guard down a little bit, but he was still buttoned up.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
unfortunately, like the producers I was working with, they know that I've done a lot of interviews, and I like to I like to test people, see what we can get. Like let's push the limits a little bit, in a respectful way. Like I never want to put anyone outside of their comfort zone too far, but if I can take them outside of their comfort zone in a safe way, like I want to do it. So I really wanted to like mess with him a little bit and see some personality come out. But they were like, no, it's the president. You're not just we've approved questions. You hit these questions, and I was like, fine. But I was definitely looking for a window to to slide in some unapproved questions. But we had a special moment because uh, our stories are kind of similar. He was raised by his single white mother. I was raised by my single white mother. We didn't meet our black biological fathers until we were adults, and then they weren't in our lives really. And then we both became president. So like obviously the parallels are they're very obvious. But we talked about that a little bit, and the question that I really had for him, and I wanted to dig down, was like, how do you how do you set an example of what a good father is when you didn't have that in your own life? Have you thought about that? Because it's a question that I deal with every single day, and and he talked a lot, and his overall advice was like, you show up and you do your best. that's really it. Whether you had a good father or no father or whatever, like you show up every day and you give it your all. And he followed that up with like, no matter who you are, you're going to screw up your kids a little bit. You know, what you try to do is really nail the big moments. You know, keep the screw ups to a minimum. You know, the big moments are like, don't leave their life, stay around. That's a big moment. The little moments are like, when you're gonna have the race talk with them, which I'm gonna have, with my kid. I'll figure that out. He's probably gonna be in therapy in 20 years and be like, I don't know what my dad was talking about. Like he mumbled through it. He started crying at some point. It was weird. Um, and oh well, sorry kid, I did my best. But like, yeah, Obama's was like, hey, just accept that you're gonna, screw him up a little bit. It's okay. Stay around, do your best. And simple stuff. So
I was going to say I am not a father, and I can certainly give no fatherly advice, but I can say I bet that your sons would learn a lot from this beautiful book that you've written. So I hope that you'll hand it to them Monday or tell them download the app, guys. You got to listen.
oh yeah, when as soon as my son can read, I'm gonna be like, read the book. Have you read my book yet? Like, read it and then comment and
And write a
leave a
review.
review.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
come
And
on. Yeah.
that being said, everyone, you can find No One Here Is Like Me on Scribd. We're also going to link to this in the show notes, so you can get that Robert's got this very generous 60-day free trial for you, so you can read this. And it is an easy read and a very touching read. So I want to welcome and invite everyone here to and encourage you to give it a read. And I want to thank you, Robert, for being with me today and sharing not only your personal story, but also your process, which is maybe a little bit different conversation. And the gift of being able to get a little bit more of a backstage pass into how it all came to be. I really appreciate that.
Oh my gosh, this has absolutely been a joy. You have such an awesome energy. Like I know we're talking over the internet, but I feel your energy and it's been really a blessing today. I really appreciate that, and I'm excited for your book. Do it.
Hey,
It's gonna be
don't talk
great.
about it too much. Don't talk about it too much. We can't talk about it too much. I appreciate it. I get weird. I get weird about it. But I brought it up. Thank you for saying that. Actually, I appreciated what you said and you giving me some information about your process, because it makes me feel, just reaffirms me that like, oh, this is a way to write a book. The way you're supposed to write a book kind of gets disintegrated inside of my head the more I hear writers talk about it like you did. Like I don't have to have. There's no right way to write a book. So I appreciate that.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much today, Robert. All right. And y'all head on down to the show notes so that you can start to read this beautiful book. And Robert, I hope we get to see you back on the podcast again. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
For
take
sure.
care.